And we thank you for being here. And we will just get started as we always do by just simply giving our introductions and talking about our Ancestors Voices program. Our Ancestors Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And it's a program that is sponsored every week, every Sunday, same time, same place. So we invite you here to continue to participate with us. This program, again, is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. Pan-Africanism, by definition, is one unified socialist Africa. It is not an ideology, it's an objective. Pan-Africanism is our objective, it's our goal. One unified socialist Africa, that's what we're fighting for. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in clear detail in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is the book you see right there on the middle right of the screen by Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of the AAPRP. And a great example of our work that he outlines in the book to unite all revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa who agree with the objective of Pan-Africanism, of one unified socialist Africa. A great example of that is the work taking place in Burkina Faso right now. And if you look to the right of the screen, we have a QR code there, and we invite you to take your smartphone. It's only smart because it only works because of Central African Resources, columbite, tantalite. That's what makes the phone, that's really what makes it smart. It has nothing to do with Apple and Samsung and all those crooks and criminals. But anyway, the QR code is there on the right-hand side of your screen. We ask you to use your so-called smartphone to scan that code, and you will be taken to the application where you can support one of the many important projects that the AAPRP is working on right now that we'll be highlighting the next several weeks in our weekly program. And that is the Burkina Faso Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity. And that center is organized by people on the ground in Burkina Faso in West Africa, and people who are engaged in work to build this capacity for this objective of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And we have AAPRP organizers on the ground in Burkina Faso. And what the project is centered around is a educational center with books and educational resources and activities. And of course, if you know anything about colonialism, you know that education, the type that we really need, revolutionary, independent revolutionary education, is not something that's predominantly practiced anywhere in the African world. And Africa is no exception to that, contrary to some people's idealistic interpretations. You know, some people, I've had these conversations a lot, they think that colonialism exists here, but for some reason it missed Africa. Well, that's where it started. So clearly it didn't miss Africa. So this is a challenge that we have. And so what we want to do, what the comrades are doing with this project, the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, is they need at least a $700 a month, US dollar a month budget. And so we're asking people to sponsor a certain amount each month that you can pay. $5 a month, $10, $20, $50, $100, whatever you can pay each month. That would really help our work on the ground in Burkina Faso. So please use the QR code. We'll mention it repeatedly and support this revolutionary Pan-Africanist effort. And finally, the program each week, our Ancestors Voices, is hosted by myself, Ajamu Umi, the real Ajamu Umi, not the fake one that's trying to log into Zoom and sabotage our program, but the real one. At least as far as I know, I'm the real one. And my daughter, Shakura Umi, who both of us are active organizers within the AAPRP. So we're so thankful again for you joining us here. We give thanks and honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. As always, we give thanks and honor to every single African ancestor who stood up and resisted our oppression. And we always do that And so just to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you, Father dear. I appreciate you. Welcome, everyone. You know, we just are continuing to think about all the shoulders of our great ancestors that we stand on, our ancestors that literally paved the way, who died in the Atlantic Ocean for us, who fought and died on the way, trying to prevent us from being further exploited. I was thinking about some of the museums that are located here in Memphis and how they highlight what kind of decisions our people had to make in terms of drowning or sacrificing their children so that they could make their way beyond or make their family members continue on because they stopped to slow down the oppressor or the overseer that was following after them, or the police officer that started off as an overseer following after them. And so, you know, we just continue to think about how rich the continent of Africa is and how lucky we are to be descendants of such a wonderful facility that has provided resources beyond measure. We're talking about science, technology, opportunities to develop economic stability, cacao, rubber, all of these different components that we think about. My dad spoke about the coltan and the cobalt. I always think about how rich the continent is and just how much it has to offer. I think about the work that Kwame Nkrumah did with the farmers in terms of working for them to have a better way to use the cacao. And of course, we gave our seminar already on what was going on with Muammar Gaddafi and the work that they did with recycling water. And it's really amazing to think about how resilient they were, even though Obama shut that system down and depleted thousands of people's ability to have clean access to water. We think about cities in the US like Flint and Jackson, Mississippi, that still don't have water to this day. And so just thinking about this basic necessity that some of us may take for granted, but that a lot of us probably understand is because of our ancestors like Muammar Gaddafi, that we're able to understand just how rich a resource like that actually is. And more importantly, Muammar and the people that followed to make that movement what it was in terms of giving access and rejuvenizing water on a new level, allowing those folks to understand that all people deserve to have clean, fresh water and making that accessible to them, and understanding that that is not a reason to take that from someone, because from a collective standpoint, water benefits all of us. And if we all are not dehydrated, then we're all going to be able to contribute in a different way to the society. And so, no, today's seminar is not about water. It's about patriarchy. But I do connect the dots for you to help you understand that it's also about collectivism. And part of that is understanding how vicious of a system patriarchy is, because just like understanding that you shouldn't take access of water from someone, you need to understand that patriarchy is pretty much the well that has dried up. And so we have to continue to call a spade a spade. We have to continue to acknowledge, we have to be honest with ourselves about how forward we want to get. How much more advanced do we want to get if we do not want the oppressor to be controlling us anymore, controlling our resources, telling us how to live and how to use the resources that our continent, our motherland has provided. Then that means we must lift every single hook that the ancestor has in our backs, metaphorically, ideologically, physically, spiritually, mentally, in every space that you can think of. I was talking to an indigenous comrade the other day, and they were talking to me about how much their spiritual religion meant to them. And I was just listening to them talk, and they were just saying about how indigenous people have been through so much. And of course, I agreed with them. And then they said, you know, we've even been through the survival of Catholicism being colonialized. And I've just listened to them and I thought, you know, that's a very interesting point, because, you know, majority of the religions that we think about today, especially the ones that were not ordained on the continent of Africa, have had so much detoxification and mixturization of Africanism being taken out of it, spiritual African techniques, spiritual practices of African uniqueness taken out, and instead diluted with European isms and whiteness and all of these other studies that have come to make us understand that when we think about who Jesus Christ looks like, We don't automatically think of a person who has melanin in their skin. And so I think that it's really, really critical if we're really going to do our history to understand what the concept of all of this looks like. This is why a lot of us get into conversations with people about Judaism and things like that, because we need to understand where it started. And the cradle of civilization, everything that we know starts in Africa. It has always started in Africa, just like the problems that exist in the world have started in Africa. So we're not going to fix them by fighting and marching in Memphis, Tennessee. We're not going to fix those problems by fighting and marching in Sacramento, California. We're not going to fix those problems by fighting and marching in Miami or in British Columbia or in Germany. The best way that we can fix those problems is starting from the center where it all began. And that's why we all need to organize everywhere, whether it's with the party, if you are African, or with another organization that is working for justice, so that we can still get back to the roots and get to our masses of organizers on the ground in Africa, so that we can continue to take out these people one by one, because they cannot win. We won't let them win, and we shouldn't give them any ease of thinking that they can win. Every single time they try to push back and they nudge us, we should push back and nudge them harder. And we should remind them of who we come from, because we are so lucky to have the ancestors that we had. If we all had cowardly ancestors, none of us would be listening to the Zoom right now, because we all would be dead. So that means that our ancestors did everything they could and then some, and sacrificed every bone in their body. Why? Because they were a selfless people. That's why. Because they were humanistic. That's why. Because they understood that they needed to defend themselves, but they didn't necessarily go and terrorize groups, because we understood that we were such humanistic people. We were actually trying to think about ways that all of us could benefit, instead of just assuming that the other person was a threat. And once we realized that people were a threat, we took matters into our own hands and took weapons that we needed to take, and we did what we needed to do. And we've always had that blood pulsing through our veins. We've always had that courage, that bravery, that dignity pulsing through us. So we can't let patriarchy define us. We can't let patriarchy mold us. And we can't let patriarchy confuse us on how the rest of our future needs to be crafted, because that would be literally undoing all the work that we have worked so hard to do, to unlearn colonization, to decensor colonization and decenter colonization, as well as decentering white supremacy. Allowing patriarchy to win literally gives power to all of those entities, colonization, whiteness, and white supremacy, that I just mentioned, because that's the foundation of those systems. That's not a foundation of Africa. And the few times that it tried to exist in Africa, we shut it down, and we need to continue to work on doing that. So we have to understand that the correct definition of nationalism as a concept is movement of colonized people who are fighting to liberate their stolen land. When millions of people commemorated Palestine Resistance Day, Free Palestine and Occupy Palestine, recently, that was a day based around the correct desire of the Palestinian people to liberate Palestine from the clutches of the settler colonial Zionists. That's why that day was centered around Palestinian flags and Palestinian people expressing their commitment to fight against settler colonialism and the oppression Zionism represents. For people who study and participate in revolutionary struggle, this is a correct and logical approach. That's why that day wasn't about socialism as a solution. It wasn't about anarchism as a solution. It wasn't about maintaining capitalism as a solution. That day was all about the Palestinian people expressing their just desire to see their land liberated, because they understand that the theft of their land is the key to their ability to exert their will and develop their human interests. Despite the white left, socialists, and anarchists spending decades attempting to define nationalism solely within the context of their narrow European history of reactionary nationalism, for the Palestinian people, nationalism, or a movement around nationhood, is the correct stage of their struggle, just as African nationalism or Pan-Africanism is the correct stage for the struggle of African liberation. And the same is true for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. The question of economics, i.e. socialism, etc., that comes later. You cannot talk about how we are going to grow food on our land or your land if your land does not belong to you. the first step has to be getting your land back. And that step, properly defined, is nationalism. So we understand that in celebrating nationalism, that means regaining control of what is ours, which, as I said before, means removing unnecessary guests who don't need to be in your space. The same is true when we think about how our comrades in Burkina Faso have to pay a tax to the French because they have colonized them. I mean, just wrap your brain around that for a second. Somebody comes into your house and tries to take all your furniture and tells you that you have to go. And then you have found a way to resist them and to fight against them. And then they say, well, I won't colonize you. I'll just neo-colonize you. So instead of me taking your house and kicking you out, you can stay here, but you're going to have to pay me money every month so that you can stay on my property, even though it's your property. That's what our comrades are doing right now. Our comrades in Ghana are doing that. Our comrades in Guinea are doing that. Our comrades in the Gambia are doing that. And it makes me sick to my stomach because the Portuguese, the French, the British, they had no right to be there in the first place. When I think about the Berlin Conference, I get so angry and fed up and sick to my stomach because they sat there and they divided out my continent like it was a slice of pizza. And that just shows you how much they think so little of the people that live there. So it's our responsibility to resist the Berlin Conference and to resist any neo-colonizers, as well as the puppeteers that the neo-colonizers have hired, because just because there are African people in politics does not mean that they can be trusted, okay? Because they're getting paid and they have money in their pockets because they support imperialism. So we get out the neo-colonizers and we get out any Africans who are confused and are standing in the way of Africa achieving its victory. As much as Africa has done for us, we owe it to Africa to fight back. We owe it to Africa to get the shackles and the chains off of the land. We owe it to ourselves to get it back. Next slide, please. Oh, you're already there. Thank you. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back. Thank you. I appreciate you. Okay. So in thinking about patriarchy as a system, you all, we have to think about how far back it traces, right? Because the roots of patriarchy go back 15,000 years at the time when communalism began as a transition to slavery as being the primary force of economic practices by humanity. Now, our comrade Sekou Touré writes in their classic text, quote, "The history of class struggle," end quote, that once men realized that they could generally impose their physical will on the societies around them, they began to physically dominate women, women identifying people, and forcing them to serve their interests. This was the beginning stages of the class division, or people systematically oppressing other people based on organized power and how it came into dominance. I just want to restate that sentence because it's very important. If we are trying to achieve socialism, that means we are beginning to eradicate all class divisions. And if you have not been paying attention, or if you have missed the last couple of seminars, let me remind you that class division is the very reason that capitalism and imperialism are so successful. Because class division literally permits people to make them think that they are better than you just because they may or may not have more money than you have access to. Their status might be higher than yours. They may have more social capital than you do, or maybe you think you're better than them because of class division. This is why you have some students who are getting secondary educations and they don't understand why other people need to get financial aid. Because of a class division. They don't have to worry about getting financial aid because they can afford to pay out of pocket for school. Whereas some of us are very good at filling out financial aid packages and applications because we understand that school should not even be as much expensive as it is. And because it's expensive, we have to fight harder to do what we need to do to get access to those resources, which should not be charged, because anytime you have people educating themselves, that's going to benefit humanity. But we don't live in a just society where people understand that they need to benefit humanity. We live in a society where it's all about yourself and where you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So unfortunately, the institution wants to make as much money off of you as possible, which is why you have to pay for a tuition. And that's also why some of us have to get extra loans on top of already paying for that tuition. So I bring this stage up to help us really highlight, this is how class divisions got started, is with some of us understanding that we, quote unquote, were better than other people because we were trying desperately just to figure out what kind of power we could have access to. And so because a lot of that power was stripped from a lot of our people, our male identifying counterparts were trying to grapple as much as they could with what they had to work with. And I personally think because they were debilitated and dehumanized and disrespected ultimately, that they thought, well, who can I then have towership over because I don't have it? And so then that's where some of that came to be. And the assumption that you are better than somebody because they're not a male, that just kind of exacerbated the already depleting situation, because there were already assumptions that non-male people didn't deserve the same respect. There were already assumptions that non-male people didn't deserve to be treated with humanity and dignity, right? And so from there, we just watered the plant. From there, patriarchy just started off as a seed and just grew into this forest of trees that all need to be burned or cut down. I'm sorry, environmentalists, but that's the truth, because the oxygen that is coming from this forest of patriarchy is killing us all, including male identifying people. Sure, that system benefits them, but it also hurts you all. And we could sit here and debate all day about how much it does not help you, and I will win the debate. Trust and believe that. So we have to continue to think about how slavery has transitioned to feudalism, or kingdoms approximately 10,000 years old. This system of exploiting women and women identifying people has literally become an institution at every aspect of society. This is found in education systems. You have patriarchy. It's found in faith institutions. You have patriarchy. You see it at your jobs. If you have a slave, you see it there. If you're in a social organization or a social collective group, or maybe you just want to go to the movies, you see it in your social life. Patriarchy is at the dog park. When you take your dog to the dog park, patriarchy can be found in animals. If you have a female identifying dog or a dog that is non-binary, they will communicate to you that they suffer from patriarchy. And if you don't believe me, just watch the male dog come and mound your dog without even asking permission. Trust and believe that, because their objective is to do what they need to do without even thinking about how their choices are affecting other people. Not to mention the fact that we are raising male dogs to think that they are more superior than the rest of the dogs. Lizards, birds, we all suffer from patriarchy, not just humanity. Animals suffer from it. Plants suffer from patriarchy. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. So we have to understand that the myth that women and women identifying people evolved from the breastbone of men became the template for defining the relationship of women as being lesser than men, thus justifying and normalizing patriarchal oppression. I love this piece about how faith institutions and education systems have highlighted patriarchy, because that is precisely why we need to work extra hard to unlearn these concepts that have been shoved down our throats and to teach our children a different way. It is not okay that we are teaching them some of the same systems that have exacerbated our confusion and caused us to reevaluate things at a later stage. We also need to start to speak out in these faith spaces and hold other people accountable and hold the system of mono-religion accountable, so that we can start to look at this a different way. Hopefully there's a way to change it, but if not, then maybe we need to start our own religion that doesn't promote and perpetuate patriarchy. That's also a thought. And so I will close with this. Despite the efforts by reactionaries to attempt to claim that matriarchy and patriarchy are equivalent, there is absolutely no shred of evidence that matriarchal societies practice systematic oppression against men on any level. Again, there is no evidence at all that matriarchal societies have practiced systematic oppression against male identifying people and males on any level, whereas, contrary, the evidence is overwhelming about how patriarchy has used its systems to oppress women and women identifying people. Overwhelming. If you have 18 hours, I would be more than happy to give you some examples. Join an organization that is working for justice and try your hardest to count the circumstances and situations where patriarchy is evident. For the next week, count how many times you see patriarchy and count how many times you speak out and do something about it. Join an organization that is working for justice and resist patriarchy, because your organization is not going to be successful if patriarchy is still breathing oxygen.
Ashe, thank you very much. My daughter, appreciate it. And we're just going to continue on. Of course, just making the note, please donate, become a donator to our project work at home in Burkina Faso. We have really tried to highlight the Pan-African work that we're engaged in for a number of weeks. If you recall, we focused on the work of the Zimbabwe movement for Pan-African socialists in Zimbabwe, one of our sibling parties there, and people donated and they received that money and were able to use it to facilitate their liberation work there. And now we're focused on the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity in Burkina Faso. Thomas Sankara, of course, was the young revolutionary military leader in Burkina Faso who helped bring about the revolution there, who was assassinated by forces of imperialism. So support our effort to engage and build revolutionary capacity at home in Africa, in this case, Burkina Faso. If you don't have a smartphone, you can just simply log on to the URL there on the screen. And if you have a smartphone, the QR code is there. Please donate. If you don't do it, no one else is. No one's going to come and save us. The fake person trying to log in under my name is not going to donate to this project. We need you to do that. So please do it. And so we'll go into some myths and truths about nationalism. And then we'll do the same about patriarchy. As you see the picture of one of the best examples of nationalism was the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded by Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Amy Ashwood Garvey in 1915 in Jamaica, and an organization that grew to function in almost 46 countries around the world. So let's talk about some myths and truths about nationalism. First, one myth about nationalism is that it only really has one definition, and that definition is when people are ethnocentric, meaning people that think they're better than other people. That is projected as the only way you can define nationalism. And the example that's always given to justify that definition is the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. These Germans thought they were better than other people. They developed this Aryan nations myth, and they began to perpetuate their will over the planet because they thought they were better than everybody. So based on that example, nationalism can never be a good thing. That's the way it's presented to us. But we know that everything is dialectical, right? Everything, all true revolutionaries, I would argue, have to understand historical and dialectical materialism, have to understand those concepts. And we don't have time. Maybe we'll do a program just specifically on historical and dialectical materialism. That's probably not a bad idea. But for now, we'll just say that it's the struggle of opposites. Everything has opposites. You can't have bad unless you have good. You can't have good unless you have bad. The way that you're able to define that something is good is based on your understanding of what's bad. The way you're able to define that something is bad is based on your understanding of what's good. So you cannot have one without the other. And the basic fundamental tenet of the universe is the struggle of opposites. Good is in a constant struggle against bad. And that's fundamentally the definition of the struggle that we're engaged in. We see the struggle for justice for the masses of people on earth as primarily good, and we see the international capitalist imperialist network led by the United Snakes of America, Zionist Israel, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, all of the crooks and criminals on earth as primarily bad. So if we understand that basic fundamental definition of historical dialectical materialism, or just dialectics as a whole, then we know that nothing can ever be completely bad. Nothing can ever be completely good. I mean, that's just a reality. Like we had a seminar in the APRP yesterday, and I had the privilege of presenting for it. And so I explained the example, what I just said here, in that the COVID pandemic, obviously it was primarily bad. We lost millions of people on the planet Earth. That there's no question. It was certainly a negative thing, but everything is dialectical. So you ask, well, what the hell could be positive about the pandemic? Well, what I talked about yesterday, because the seminar we had was about social media, the proper usage of social media in a healthy way instead of a destructive way. And we talked about the pandemic brought about programs like this one, the one you're participating in right now. And we have many others in the APRP, the Pantula podcast, the Pan-African News Show, Forward Ever podcast. All of these programs we're producing throughout the APRP that reach thousands of people all over the world, a capacity we didn't have before the pandemic. That's a good thing. So everything is dialectical. Some things are primarily positive, some things are primarily negative, but everything has positives and negatives. And nationalism is no different. And so in nationalism, for colonized people, as Shakura mentioned in the example she used of the Palestinian people fighting for their land back, Palestine, nationalism is a positive thing. For the African masses, nationalism is a positive thing. For all colonized people, the indigenous people, nationalism is a positive thing, because the role that nationalism serves for us is it's a process for which we can reclaim our identity. And in doing so, we can reclaim our lands, which have been stolen from us, so that they could benefit the people who are oppressing us. And that entire process is a national liberation struggle. Don't let anybody tell you that's a negative thing. That's a very positive thing. And also, don't let anybody convince you that the only definition of nationalism is how nationalism has been practiced in Europe. Because as Kwame Ture said many times, the history of Europe is not the history of the world. It's the history of Europe, and that's it. It's not our history. I know a lot of us think it is, because all we've ever been taught is the European vision of history, but it is not our history. So we cannot evaluate nationalism based on how it's played out in Europe. Because if you look at how it's played out in Europe compared to how it's played out in Africa, Asia, Central South America, and the Caribbean, it's completely different. And this is borne out in the statement that Secretary makes in Africa on the Move, when he talks about the differences in history and nationalism between Africa and Europe. The differences in nationalism between Africa and Europe. And what Ahmed Secretary talked about is he talks about the history of Africa being a history of the family developing into the clan, into the tribe, into the community, into the nation. And that was our natural evolution based on our culture as an African people. Colonialism interrupted that process. Colonialism interrupted that process. And so as a result, we didn't get to finish our natural evolution. And you all know evolution means the natural progression of things. Revolution means the struggle to transform things. So this interruption in our forward progress has made revolution necessary, and something that we are engaged in to continue our forward progress as a human family, as an African human family. So because of that reality, nationalism is not a negative thing for African people. It's a positive thing. It's a positive thing for us to say, my name shouldn't be Lenny Johnson. My name should be Ajamu Umi. Lenny Johnson wasn't my slave name, but I'm just using an example. I had a slave name. I had a French name. My parents are from Louisiana here in the United States, where the French colonized it. So I had a French name. It was Dehaut. My name was Richard Darrell Dehaut. And that's a slave name. There's nothing else you can call it. You might not want to hear that because it hurts your feelings or whatever, but we're not dealing with hurt feelings. We're dealing with historical fact. It's a slave name. The only reason why I had that name is because some white man from France and some white woman from France stole my ancestors, took them to Louisiana, named them after them as property, like you name your pets, named them Dehaut. And that name was passed down my family until it got to me. And fortunately, myself and Shakura's mother said, no more. We're putting a stop to that. and we're going to reclaim who we are. We're African people. We should have African names. If a Chinese person walked up to you and told you, well, my name is Ajamu Lumumba, you would look at them like they were insane, because it wouldn't make any sense for them to have a name like that. And you would ask them, where did you get a name like that? But colonialism has been so normalized for us that we'll sit there, Lenny Johnson, and nobody blinks an eye. And then when I introduce myself, Ajamu Umi, or Shakura introduces herself, Shakura Umi, well, where did you get a name like that? I got it from my history and my culture. The correct question is, where the hell did you get a name like Lenny Johnson? There's no Sons of John in Africa. That's a British name. Those are the people who stole you. That's like naming yourself after the people who break in your house and steal all your possessions. When we carry these colonial names, that's what we're doing. So what Secretary is saying is that when we claim our identity and our land, because the reason why we're in the oppressed condition we're in is because our land has been stolen. Africa has been stolen. Africa is supplying riches for all of the multinational capitalist corporations on earth. We don't get a cent of those riches. That's why we're poor. That's why we're powerless. That's why they're rich. That's why they control power. So even an absolute fool would be able to understand, well, those people need to regain their lands that were stolen from them. And we don't have any right to regain these lands right here. They don't belong to us. They belong to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we don't correct injustice by perpetuating injustice. We can only correct injustice by perpetuating justice. And that means that the only lands that belong to us are Africa. That's our national homeland. We don't care. You don't know anything about Africa. You've been fed lies by colonization for 500 years. That's your problem that you need to correct by getting properly politically educated. We're not going to bow down to that nonsense. We're going to tell the truth. The only lands we have access to, that we have any right to, is Africa. And so the only reason why some of us don't see that is because we don't know anything about Africa. You can't introduce me to a single African who is anti-Africa who knows anything about Africa. Everyone I met many Africans who are anti-Africa, thousands of them, and not one of them knew a damn thing about Africa. The only thing they could tell me about Africa is what the slave master put in their head. And that's why they believe what they do. So we know that liberating our land is a positive development for us. And so nationalism is a positive thing for colonized African people. The liberation of Africa is a positive development for us. Whereas in Europe, nationalism has played a different role. And Secretary talked about that when he talked about in Africa, our progression has been to go from states to a nation. The states in Africa were developed by colonialism. Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Zimbabwe, those borders were created by the Europeans. So those states don't serve our interests. So that's why when you go to Ghana, and Burkina Faso is right next to Ghana, you have Akan people in both countries. And they don't call themselves, they call themselves, I'm Akan, I'm Fante, I'm God. They don't say, oh, I'm Burkina Faso, because that's foreign to a lot of people. That was imposed upon them. So states for us in Africa, that's a foreign concept. Whereas evolving through revolutionary struggle to a nation, one unified socialist Africa, that's a logical progression for us. And so that's how Secretary talked about that. Whereas Europe is the opposite. Europe has devolved from nations to states. You look at Europe in the last 30 years, Europe has disintegrated. There's no more Czechoslovakia. There's no more Yugoslavia. There's no more, everything's been split apart. Now you have Serbia, Croatia, the Czech Republic, the Slovenia. You have all of this. So Europe is going in the opposite direction of Africa. Africa is going towards one unified socialist Africa. We know about what happened in Sudan a decade or so ago, but that's temporary. We are clearly moving towards one unified socialist Africa. And that's because nationalism and national liberation is a necessary prerequisite to socialist revolution and development. And we know that. And all genuine revolutionaries know that. Vladimir Lenin in his classic book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he talked about national liberation being a necessary prerequisite to socialism. He says that in the book. All you so-called white Marxist Leninists, you didn't read it. You probably didn't read anything. All you read is I'm white, and so that means I know what I'm talking about. Well, you don't know a damn thing to us. You certainly know nothing about African liberation. So that's why we don't listen to you. We don't need you. We don't care what you think about the work we're doing. We don't need anything from you. So we're going to stand on our own feet. We're going to stand on our own principles. And nationalism is without question a positive part of our development. And the Europeans on the left, in the West, or whatever they are, don't listen to them when they talk about nationalism. It's like a woman who has born children listening to me talk about childbirth. It's a complete waste of your time. And now let's talk about myths and truths about patriarchy. So we're going to talk about, because many women participate and or support patriarchy, the myth is that means it must be okay, right? Like my mother, for example, patriarchal, right? It's a patriarchal society. So she used to tell me, you can't trust women. You can't trust women, son. Women are evil. She used to tell me that all the time. And a lot of you women listening, you perpetuate patriarchy all the time. I hear it all the time from women. Well, women are petty. When you work with women, they're petty. And I always say when I hear that, so who is in control of the work site? I don't know a single work site that women are in control of. I don't know a single industry that women are in control of. Men control capitalism in this world today. So how the hell is it women shaping the work environment? And when you see women behaving that way, it's because they're trying to act like men. So this is a problem of patriarchy. But women perpetuate patriarchy, just like Africans perpetuate white supremacy. It happens all the time. My parents did that too. They perpetuate, they didn't mean to, but that's how we're miseducated. So because of that, you find yourself in a situation where people, because we don't study, we don't rely on scientific analytical analysis to come to our conclusions. We rely on anecdotal stuff, well, what people said. So we get into this backward reality where you can be having a conversation and a woman will say, well, I don't have a problem with men dominating me. Well, she said it, so then it must be okay. No, she's just an idiot and doesn't know what's in her best interest. That's what that means. It doesn't mean just because she's a woman and has breasts and a vagina that everything she says about women is correct. Just like it doesn't mean any random African who says, well, I don't believe in racism or white supremacy, just because their skin is black, that doesn't give them any validity. They're just an idiot. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. That shouldn't be that difficult for us to understand that that's what's happening, because we all know people like that don't know what the hell they're talking about. Herschel Walker saying, well, there's no racism. They ain't no racism. He can't even say it properly, then, I mean, that's an idiot. I'm not going to waste my time debating with an idiot. I'm going to call it what it is. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He's a football player. He probably got hit in the head too many times and has CTE and needs to be hospitalized instead of him out here talking like he's an expert, has an expert analysis on the conditions of our people. So understand that patriarchy is a system, and it's a system that's perpetuated by systemic means. Men perpetuated, women perpetuated, non-gender binary people perpetuate patriarchy, period. And people can be positive examples of forward progress while maintaining positions in support of patriarchy. This is a myth. This is a myth. If you're patriarchal, you are not seriously representing our people in a positive vein. So these people that are out here, and I won't even name them because I don't even want to give them that boost, but these people are out here talking about they're for African people and they're patriarchal, advancing backward notions like polygamy and all these things. You can't, that's an oxymoron. You cannot say that you're for African people and support a system that oppresses over half of the African population. I mean, a grade school child should be able to understand that that's a contradiction. It's just not possible. If you are seriously for African liberation, you have to be against all systems that oppress African people and all systems that oppress humanity. So that means if you are seriously for African liberation, you have to be against white supremacy. You have to be against patriarchy. You have to be against homophobia. You have to be against the oppression, ageism, and the oppression of youth or elderly people, the oppression of people who are physically challenged. You have to be against all of those things. And by virtue of being against all of those things, you have to be against capitalism. And if you're against capitalism, that means you have to be in support of socialism. We're not afraid to say it here because we know what we're talking about. People all the time, well, I'm against capitalism, but I can't tell you when I'm for it. Well, shut up and do more research and then come back and make your statement. You're not ready to make it. You're not ready to make it. But we are. We're ready to make it. We are for scientific socialism leading to worldwide communism. Understand that. Let that digest. We are not confused. Well, I don't use labels. That's because you don't want to be accountable to anything because you don't know what you're talking about. I'll use the label because I understand the label. I'm a scientific socialist, a revolutionary Pan-Africanist dedicated to socialist construction in Africa leading to worldwide communism. And I'm happy to tell you where you're confused if you try to say, well, that's not a good thing. That's exactly what we're for. So this is what we're talking about when we say you got to be against systems of oppression if you're going to say that you're for the masses of people. And then this other concept that cis or so-called heterosexual, whatever you want to call it, men like myself who are anti-patriarchy are only that way because we are in the closet. And that's so stupid, it's not even worth the explanation. It's not even worth the explanation. You know, and people write that to me all the time. They won't say it to my face. I would love to have somebody say it to my face. They won't say anything to my face. No insult whatsoever. When I see them, they grinning and smiling, clowning like the coons that they are. But that just doesn't even make any sense. And if you believe that kind of nonsense, then you know, all I can say to you is if you believe that, if that's your level of thinking, you should fill your sink up with scalding hot water and then put your head in it. That's all I can say to you. You'd be doing humanity a favor if you did that. You know, that's just all we can say about that. The strongest manifestation of African manhood is strong anti-patriarchy politics and practice. That's a truth, you all. That is absolutely true. It's 100% true. The strongest manifestation of any man, of any nationality, is strong anti-patriarchal politics and strong practices, not just talking about it, but doing it, putting yourself in a position where you have to practice it. And that requires humility. And a lot of men don't have that kind of humility. But we have to do the work so that we can develop it, because it's a necessary part of the struggle that we have to develop and engage in. So the convergences of nationalism and patriarchy. And please donate Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation, Pan-African Unity, the QR code and the URL code at the top. Please support revolutionary Pan-African work. But the convergences of nationalism and patriarchy, both concepts in their reactionary framework, because we talked about patriarchy is reactionary and nationalism is reactionary when it's used within certain contexts, like for ethno-chauvinism, like it has been used in Europe. So in both of those frameworks, they serve the interests of capitalism and imperialism. When nationalism and patriarchy are both in existence and it's reactionary, they do nothing but serve the interests of capitalism and imperialism. For example, when you have a patriarchal regime that leads, you have patriarchal struggle that leads to some sort of change, like you see this all the time, right? There'll be a coup d'etat, for example, and it's not designed to really do anything except change one group of people in power to another group of people in power. Nothing about changing the conditions of the people so that their lives improve and maintaining the systems of oppression like patriarchy. This serves capitalism and imperialism. It doesn't serve humanity. And then the criteria to find whether something is correct has to be about where that something falls in the question of mass human progress. In other words, the way, if you want to understand whether something is right or wrong, how does it fit into what's happening with the masses of people on earth. Like if you take something like gentrification, you know, people say, well, gentrification, like now we got restaurants to go to, bars, we can do this and do that. And it's not, the crime isn't as bad now in that neighborhood. Well, on the surface level, those are through. And for surface level thinkers, people that can't think deeply, can only think on a surface level, then wow, that's a wonderful thing to be so airheaded. But for people who really want to understand the world so that we could do the work necessary to change it, we go much deeper than that. And we know that the only way you can really evaluate the impacts of gentrification is the poorest people, the people who are being removed. What happens to them? Where do they go? Do their lives improve? Of course they don't. Then how can you sit here and say that it's a positive thing? That's like saying that when you spray your houses with roaches and you don't see any more roaches, well, that's good for the roaches. It's it's good for you. So just be honest and say, I don't give a damn about anybody else. It's just good for me. It makes it life more comfortable for me. I don't care what happened to the houseless people or the brown people or whoever got removed. I don't care. I couldn't care less. I don't even want to see them. Just say that, because we know that's what it is anyway. You're not fooling us. You're only fooling yourself. So that's what we mean when we say the criteria has to be, what is the condition for the people on the bottom? If that's not improving, then whatever you're talking about ain't the solution. Period, dot. And then understand dialectics, and that positives and negatives exist in everything, but not on equal terms, like I said a little while ago. So everything has some positive in it. Everything has some negative in it. Some things have more positive than negative. Some are 90% positive, 10% negative. Some are 90% negative, 10% positive. Slavery is 99.9% negative, but everything is dialectical. There's no exceptions. It's a universal law of nature. So even slavery had some positives. I'm an African, I can say that. Well, what are the positives of slavery? Well, the positives are that the slave trade that my ancestors suffered to have me sitting in this cesspool nation right now, that oppresses the entire planet, it did produce industrialization. And industrialization created technology. And technology is a good thing, especially when it becomes under the control of the masses of people for the purpose of advancing humanity. Then it'll really be a good thing. But even now, it's still a good thing because it allows us to do more with less effort. It allows us to be able to accomplish things that we could not accomplish 1,000 years ago. It allows us to do that. The technology is here to solve all of the problems on Earth. The problem is that the will isn't there because capitalism dominates the Earth. So don't confuse that into making you believe technology is bad. That's not what that means. It just means we have to wrest control of the forces of nature, of the means of production, from these thugs that are controlling it. That's all that means, and use it in a way that advances humanity. That's what that means. And the only way that that can happen is we have to be diligent about wiping out any and all systems of oppression. And patriarchy is one of those systems. And nationalism, properly understood and practiced, is a tool for us to regain that. And there's no chauvinism in our nationalism because we recognize other people's struggles. We don't think we're better than anybody else. So, these people talking about European history, they don't know what they're talking about. We don't think we stand side by side with the Palestinian people in their nationalism, side by side with the indigenous people in their nationalism. I love to see, and I saw something the other day where some indigenous, I saw the interview during Standing Rock, that rebellion, that resistance a few years ago in the Dakotas. And they asked the young indigenous warrior what he felt about the land and the water. And he said, the land means everything to us. And I get emotional hearing that because that's how I feel about Mother Africa. It means everything. And the only people that don't understand that are people who just have their head in the toilet, or people who only think the history of Europe is the only thing that matters. Everybody else, other than those two categories, understands exactly what that warrior meant when he said that. And so that's what we're talking about when we say positives and negatives, and nationalism being primarily positive for colonized and oppressed people. So we are so thankful for you joining us here for this session today. And we're going to continue on this vein, just taking some basic concepts and talking about them in a way that we sincerely hope helps people understand how to digest them better so that you can use them better in your life and see how they play a positive role in your life. So next week, our Ancestors' Voices, we're going to be talking about socialism 101. We're going to be breaking down socialism. This is not, you know, this is not a Rachel Maddow or what's the Joy Reid or none of that nonsense. This is a real analysis of scientific socialism, which you're not getting from any of those clowns. So tune in next week so you can get it and understand. That's why you don't know what it, be honest, you don't know what it is. And that's why you don't know it, because you're watching them people. And the more you watch them, the less you'll understand about what's happening in the world. So we're going to give you a real understanding. Go to the APRP Forward Ever shop. Please go there and buy something. Don't say, well, I bought something last night. Okay, we appreciate that. But you bought something at the supermarket last night and you were there first thing this morning and you'll be there tomorrow and the day after that. And that's why then people continue to stay in power. And the reason why we don't is you'll buy one thing from the movement and then you won't even think about it again. And you have to sustain your support for the revolution the same way you sustain your support for the master. I mean, that don't even sound right. You know, I give more support to the master than I do the revolution, but I sure do. I sure do think that they should do more to make us free. Well, you're the reason why we can't do more. So do more. Help us gain capacity. Support us on a regular basis, because you know you're getting back what you need from us. We're not driving around in big Mercedes, Teslas and all that stuff. We contributing to the people every day. Go to aprp-intl.org. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. abetterworld.me. You can go there to get all of these videos housed there. There's all kind of resources there. Hoodcommunist.org is an outstanding revolutionary African blog. Check it out. Every Thursday, there's new articles there. Donate to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, one of the projects the APRP is working with on the ground in Burkina Faso and West Africa. Please go there and support. Use the URL link and donate. Use the QR code there on the screen and donate, 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 donate. Support the African Revolution. Support the African Revolution. Please support the African Revolution. And because the African Revolution is supporting you. Check out all of our programs. They're listed on the bottom, and we have so much good information coming out through these programs. We strongly encourage you to support them. Please continue to buy my book and tell people about it, A Guide for Organized Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 hard copy, or paperback rather, $5 through the digital version. We use the proceeds to struggle and organize for justice, so we appreciate your support. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever in any endeavor. Don't believe what these people are telling you. We are winning. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Patriarchy, white supremacy, they're backward systems. They got to go. Forward ever.